everyone knows, and Steinfeld, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mary. And thank you very much to the Laguna Beach Democratic Club. How about a big hand for the Democratic Club, please? I've had the honor to read this book in the last several days, and I got to tell you, it's a must-have. And there are going to be books available at the back table. Courage Over Fear, Harness the Power of Agency to Lead in Uncertain Times. And rolling through the book, it could not have been titled better. Kristen Kavanaugh is the co-founder and CEO of the Agency Initiative. It's an organizational effectiveness and leadership development consulting firm. And it's dedicated to creating a world with more leaders and organizations choosing courage in their most critical moments. What we've been seeing over the last 109 days now is not a lot of courage in our elected officials and the people that surround them. She has served as the Vice Chair of the Department of Defense's inaugural Defense Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion until it was disbanded by Trump earlier this year. For nearly 6 years, she served as the Director of Inclusion, Talent, and Learning at Tesla, where she led the DEI talent management and learning and development functions for Tesla. Kristen holds a master's degree in social work from USC and a bachelor's degree from the United States Naval Academy. We first of all thank her for her service to our country, and we welcome for the conversation Kristen Kavanaugh.
Thanks for the introduction. Thank you, Mary, for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here and grateful for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. We are looking forward to this, and people should be looking forward to the book. It's a fabulous read. Thank you for writing it, and thank you also to Mike Randolph for being a co-author. I'm going to take a passage directly from the book and ask you a question spawned from it. That here, our country is increasingly marked by uncertainty, with authoritarianism and divisive rhetoric on the rise everywhere, and fear-based leadership becoming the norm, especially at the top, rendering courageous, values-driven leaders less visible and less influential. Figures like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, these are deeply flawed human beings whose character issues would have once been disqualifying. They're now upheld as models of executive success, as they normalize the racist and sexist and homophobic and xenophobic behaviors with rhetoric that now permeates our workplaces. The first question is, what changed?
I don't know that anything changed. I think people were given permission to be themselves. And what we're seeing is folks who, once we had decorum and we had norms and ways that we spoke to each other, ways that we respected one another, and those have gone out the window. And so you see, and I think Donald Trump has given that permission for decorum to go out the window. And not only that, is encouraging for it to be amped up. And Elon followed suit. So when I started at Tesla back in 2016, I went to work for someone who I thought was saving the world, who cared about climate change, who was out to make a difference. I went to work for somebody who believed in DEI enough to hire a DEI leader. That's not the Elon that we all know and despise today. But there was a shift in him. And so Mike and I, you'll find out when you read the book, are sci-fi nerds. And so we kind of talk about this in terms of, we saw Anakin turn into Darth Vader. And it was right before our eyes. So I think really we saw during the pandemic, his tweets started to change, his rhetoric started to change, and then it just amped up from there. And what we're concerned about mostly is the example that it's setting for young leaders. And we witnessed that at Tesla, where people emulated Elon because that's what made you seen, that's what got you promoted, that's what made you successful. And I don't think we need another generation of Elons. And so Mike and I decided to do something about it and use our agency and the experience that we had to hopefully stop this before it goes too far.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned how 6 years, or when you started at Tesla, that he had a DEI department. Was that, do you think now that you look back, maybe out of political expedience or financial gain?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think we've all maybe learned at this point that you have to take Elon at his word, even if it is insane. And so he believed. He showed up at our events. He wanted to show up more. We're like, no, please don't. We would rather not have you here. But, you know, I wouldn't have had a job if he truly didn't believe. And I certainly wouldn't have been there for as long as I was. But when I started to feel that shift in him, the way that we talk about it in the book, we call it dissonance. So that feeling that's the gap between your values and the environment that you're working in, it starts to make you feel a certain kind of way. And I started to feel that in my chest, in my stomach, in my head. I wasn't sleeping. And so it was manifesting in my body this dissonance in the environment that I was in. And so we had to take back our agency and do something about it. We all have a choice. You could choose to stay in an environment like that. I chose to stay in an environment like that for 6 years. Or you could say, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. And I'm going to step and do something that feels more aligned, that feels like I'm moving in the right direction. And so that was the choice that I made. But we also recognize that not everybody can make that choice. And so I think something that I'm really concerned about now, you talked about, we haven't seen a lot of courageous leaders over the last 108 days or however many days. There are people who have means to be courageous, who have nothing to lose, who are doing nothing to help people who don't have the privilege of making those decisions. And I think that's what upsets me the most, is there are people who could do so much more, and they're not willing to take a big enough risk to make a difference.
What was the breaking point for you?
Can I read about it?
Please, please.
I mean, I don't think this was a breaking point, but I think this was an important point that might give you some context. Okay. No, I'm going to need the glasses. I was going to try and do it.
I can't do anything without mine.
It's new for me, so.
I need glasses to find my glasses.
Okay. I'm not there yet, but one step. Okay, so this is called the corporate battlefield. And it says, I've seen both sides. The battlefield heroics that save lives across borders and the decisions that change lives in corporate spaces across cultures. But let's be clear, corporate life isn't war. So why do corporate leaders feel the weight of the battlefield on their shoulders and pass that pressure onto their teams, especially in a globalized world where one decision can ripple across continents? Courageous leaders know the stakes are high, but they also know how to keep their teams grounded in trust and collaboration, not fear and anxiety. Just as I learned in my time as a Marine Corps officer, leading with courage, now in corporate spaces, means uniting people under shared values, even when external forces threaten to divide us. It was 2020, nearly a year into the pandemic, and my anxiety was real. I was Tesla's Director of Inclusion, Talent, and Learning, the first to take up this configuration of the role. As part of my unofficial duties, I would wake up every morning, check Twitter and the newsfeed to see what our CEO had tweeted, or which articles had been published that could send my day off the rails and brace for what I'd be virtually walking into at work. Most days, the tweets were innocuous, mostly obnoxious, but some days, they came in hot, hit hard, and blew a hole in my team's efforts. One day, he tweeted a midnight meme mocking the use of gender pronouns. No context, nothing else, simple, short, and a total bomb. Anger, then fear, then dread were my first reactions. What was I going to face when I logged into my email? The backlash was swift and fierce. Internally, employees were reeling. Externally, the media outlets were having a field day. Organizations that we had partnered with were questioning our commitment to the LGBTQ plus community, my community. It was another day on the corporate battlefield, and I had to choose courage over avoidance. This one was personal. As a member of the queer community, I knew that pronouns can mean the difference between safety and vulnerability, life and death. Speaking up in cases like this often feels like stepping into a minefield. Not in the military sense, where hierarchy and tradition dominate, and advocating for change can feel dangerous. At Tesla, the stakes were different yet daunting. Challenging the tweeting habits of one of the world's richest and most influential men came with its own set of risks. I had to have the courage to wade into the metaphorical no man's land between him, the tweet, the public, and our employees. My team was bombarded with questions and outrage. The hard truth was, we couldn't control his personal tweets. That made me feel powerless in those moments. But I could control how I showed up, and that realization became a model for my team. I had to be resilient, staying grounded and focused on what I could control for who mattered the most, our employees, especially our transgender members of our teams. My teams listened to our employees' pain and outrage. Some of them handed us our asses, as if we had tweeted that nonsense. Still, we didn't take it personally. We held space for their emotions, not rushing to silence them, but leaning into their experience and learning. We asked ourselves the hard questions. If we can't stop the tweets, what can we do to better support our LGBTQ plus employees? How do we demonstrate our commitment in action? How do we ensure that the action benefits the most people? Those reflections sparked new initiatives, not just to recover from the crisis, but to enshrine our commitment into policy and offerings. We partnered more closely with our community of transgender employees to make sure that they felt safe and included. We introduced specialized affirming healthcare benefits and organized listening and learning sessions to help our employees understand the trans experience and the important role of pronouns. Our ideas became reality, transforming the employee experience for the better. Our focus was on what I could influence and control at my level, keeping the momentum on the inclusive culture that we were building overall. That was the first one. And just as I wrote, the tweets just kept becoming more and more prevalent, more and more sexist, more and more racist, more and more and more of everything. And I was in the middle of all and expected to answer for a grown man who was tweeting this nonsense at 4 a.m.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. Before the next question, I want to ask the audience, by a show of hands, how many of you are between 18 to 25? Okay, we got two in the back. Okay. So, you founded the Agency Initiative, which is an organizational effectiveness and leadership development firm. There was a time when individuals used to show courage over fear, and even more courage as part of a movement against behavior that is morally wrong. And I'm talking about unions and civil rights and women's movement and student protests in the 60s. All of that was driven by youth. Though there are young people at protests now, and we did see, we had 4,000 people at a local protest here. We saw a lot of young people. But that protest and the protests across the country are driven by older Americans. So my question is, as a group, are young people less engaged? And if they are, how do we change that?
I think it's a valid question and a great question. Gen Z is different. The two Gen Zers here are on our team, and we learn something from them every day. But I think that's how you do it. You have to make sure that we are in places and spaces where we are together and having conversations and being open-minded enough to learn that we can learn from them. and to help them understand that they don't know it all. And there are things that we can provide them and the wisdom that we have from our experience that really helps us all come together and move forward. But I think you're right, we can't do this alone. They can't do it alone. And so we have to find some way to bridge that generational gap. And I will say it, I think that starts with our elected leaders. We need a new generation of elected leaders who are willing to step in and show
I love to be able to read a book and put it down and say, I learned something from this book. And in it, you explain the inner game and the outer game. Explain that to our audience, if you would.
Yes, I have my coach to thank for that, so I hope this is a proud moment. So we talk a lot about the actions that we take, right? Like, how do our values show up in the things that we do? That's your outer game. So what are you doing to express your values and your identities? What we don't talk about is the inner game. What's happening on the inside, the emotions, the beliefs, the feelings. And we think that those are just as connected. And so people are really willing to work on the actions they can take or the actions they're not taking on the outer game. But what would happen if we spent more time talking about our feelings and how that's impacting us and the way that things like authenticity or identity show up on the inside? And I think this has been, talked about as this is soft, right? Like, we talk about soft skills. This isn't soft skills. These are the skills that we're gonna need to be able to move into the future, especially with AI, we can talk about that, but it really is getting connected with who we are on the inside and then how that gets expressed. And so that's what we're asking people to do. You've gotta think about the way that not only how you're showing up, but who you're being in those moments. Vanessa has asked me more times than I can count, who are you going to be in this moment? And there are a lot of times where that has stopped me in my tracks and made me rethink the action that I was about to take or the thing that I was about to say, because I know who I want to be. And I want to make sure that I am aligned in the actions and in who I am in every moment that I do.
Thank you. I love that you mentioned Anakin in Star Wars. I'm a nerd too. And you do the comparison from Star Wars to Star Trek and the two different realities of those. Would you like to explain it?
Yeah, I would love to.
Please do.
Do we have, where are we at? How many Star Wars fans do we have? Okay. How many Star Trek fans do we have? All right, we're even. So, I mean, if you think about Star Wars, and war is in the title, right? That is light and dark, good and evil, existential battles and grandeur. That's what Star Wars is all, and heroics. That's what Star Wars is all about. Star Trek is about diplomacy and how do we bring peace to the universe. And it's a whole different mindset of who do we want to be? Do we want to be diplomats who are thinking about exploration and how we move forward together and how we have purpose and those kind of higher level ways of thinking and being? Or do we want to be bogged down in war and light versus dark and good? And so Mike and I believe that we want a Star Trek future. Not only do we want the teleporters and all the things, but like we believe that what would happen if we united as one world? Can you imagine what we could do together? And I think looking toward Star Trek gives you the North Star. It is right there in front of us. And I think the more that we can, and I do think with AI and the jobs and the impact that it's going to have, people are going to need to get more aligned with their purpose and why they're doing what they're doing. And so I hope that brings forward more of that Star Trek future where we care about the work we're doing because it makes us feel fulfilled and a sense of greater good.
So when I read that part of the book, I screamed upstairs to Anne-Marie, she mentioned Star Trek!
I'm glad you're excited too. Great.
So I don't know that this is even a fair question and you can answer it, but both you and Mike are leaders that have been in the thick of it. You've navigated toxic work cultures, you've juggled impossible expectations, and you've done everything you could, as you explained, to support your teams while you yourself were simply trying to survive. Is there ever a real chance that a fear-based authoritarian leader is willing to change their stripes, or is that a ship that's sailed? Will even whistleblowers or lawsuits or anything help? That's a lost cause.
No, I mean, don't be inclined to forgive Elon because now he is talking about the big beautiful bill in a way that we all knew from the beginning was not good. And so I don't think fundamentally people can change. It's because they crave power, they crave control, they promise things that they know they can't deliver. They want people living in fear. That was our experience at Tesla. Every single day we lived in fear because that was the tool Elon knew. That was the tool Elon used, and it was effective to some point. That's the same blueprint that he used at Twitter. That's the same blueprint that you all witnessed, unfortunately, with the federal government. It is a fear-based leadership style that knows one thing. I make people afraid of me so they will stay in line, and then I can do whatever it is that I want to do without question. Somebody like that does not change.
You mentioned earlier when someone complimented you on your beautiful outfit that you used to have to wear all black at Tesla. And that seems just so Orwellian.
Absolutely. Have you ever seen Elon in anything but black? No. You haven't. And it's one of those unspoken rules. It's not, we barely had a handbook to begin with. But you just know, in case you have an interaction with him, you've got to be in all black, or you could get fired. That was just the way things were. And so I had colleagues who would, and it was always women, I had colleagues who would keep black shirts in their desk drawers just in case they had to go and have a last minute meeting with him to make sure that they had black. And so it becomes a conditioning into these systems, and it really takes getting on the outside to look back and realize just how deep we were. I will tell you this, Mike has challenged me. I wear a lot of black still. And he said,
but you keep something colorful in the drawer, right?
and so Mike says, well, why don't you have the courage to wear color? And I was like, wow, okay. And so this is the most colorful thing I had. I'm showing you 5% more today by coming in full form.
You talked about several ways to cultivate courageous, values-driven leadership. What I found so easy was the 5% shift. Please tell them about the 5% shift.
Right. I mean, we think courage has to look like Marine Corps courage, big axe, bold axe, ranger. But not everybody is capable of that. And that actually doesn't get us where we need to go. What we're talking about is building a movement of courage. And to build a movement, you all know, you are grassroots organizers who are out of the front line every single day. It is the small steps that you take that actually start to help us gain progress and start to build a movement. And so we talk about this in terms in a 5% shift. So what can you do that feels a little bit risky, but not so risky that you're unwilling to do it? And so it can look like wearing a floral suit in front of a crowd of strangers, right? It can look like maybe speaking up when someone says something that is racist or xenophobic. It can look like teaching your children or teaching your grandchildren what it is like to get involved and organize and bring them out to a protest. It's the little things that are going to add up with all of us together moving in that courageous direction. Because I think if we try to do our own thing or wait for somebody to do something big, we wait for Senator Booker to do a marathon. That's great, but we can't wait on Senator Booker to do big, grandiose acts. It's going to take all of us to do the little tiny things every single day and commit to that, and commit to and have the people around you commit to making some of those courageous acts as well.
Thank you. In 2020, you took a maternity leave. During COVID, you had a baby. Your newborn spent 44 days in the neonatal ICU. The pandemic was raging, you were an exhausted new mother, and upon your return, you were asked to step back into your role as head of diversity and inclusion. And that was right after the George Floyd murder at the knee of a police officer. I have a couple of questions to fishtail off of that. Did the fight that you saw in your baby feed your courage?
That's a great question. I've never thought about it that way, but yes, he did. He was a 29-weeker. And he fought every single day, and he fights me every single day now. But yeah, I mean, I think in some sense, right? Like we started 2020 with a fight, and it's kind of continued ever since. So, I think Tesla was at a point where we were really early on in our DEI journey, and maybe you're going to ask this, but we were talking about what's our response going to be, and so if you all remember, you would see all the performative acts, right? Like a lot of companies were putting out statements, CEOs were saying things that they probably wish they hadn't said. They were changing their logos, and so we were talking about what would that look like for us, and so one of the communications people said, well, what if we fly a Black Lives Matter flag off our factory? And I almost hit the floor, because that would have been the least authentic thing that we could have done. And every single person who knew anything about Tesla and like the lawsuits of alleging racial mistreatment and harassment, it would have been the least authentic thing that we could have done in that moment. And so for me, again, coming back, I'm exhausted. I know this is the wrong thing. I have a new boss that I haven't really worked for before. And I had to go to her and say, hey, look, this isn't gonna go well. And it was that 5% more courage to just get her to stop and think for a minute. And we decided to go a totally different way and really look internally and focus on us and not make the big public statements. But it was that moment of, oh, I have to go tell my boss she's wrong right now, and hope I have a job. But I think it saved the company a lot of potential backlash if we would have been hasty to make a decision that was inauthentic to where we were in the journey.
You saw it as an empty gesture.
Absolutely.
And I applaud, as I read that in the book, I applauded you for that, because we saw a lot of that.
Absolutely.
Strictly for the sense of empty gestures. Are you stronger today because you refused to make that empty gesture?
Absolutely. Every day at Tesla made me stronger. Because every day was a new challenge. Every day was something that really made me question who I wanted to be. And I'm grateful for it. I loved my job at Tesla because I felt like I was doing the work to push climate change forward, to make our environment better for everyone. And so, yeah, you build up resilience and you go and you fight for that mission every single day. And it cut to my bone to have to make the decision to leave. But one of the reasons that Mike and I wrote this book is because you can't walk away from an experience like that and just let it be for nothing. And so we said, we can take this trauma that we both experienced and we can sit with it and live with it and be angry about it. Or we can find the good and the opportunity and the positivity in it and go use it for other people who might think that they're the only ones experiencing this. And so we felt that it was our duty to write this book, to let people know they aren't alone, and to do our part in using our suffering for the greater good. And so I am much stronger for that.
And we're better for it, for having you here.
I hope so.
In the Marine Corps, you never say retired, you just say former. And you're a former Marine Corps officer, you're a Marine Corps officer, and you were Tesla's Director of Inclusion, Talent and Learning. Was the Marine Corps equally toxic?
It was toxic in a different way. And I'm glad you asked this question too. So I think my Marine Corps experience and Naval Academy experience was really formative to the way that I decided to show up at Tesla. So I went to the Naval Academy wide-eyed, thought I wanted to be a Navy pilot, and then I met a Marine, and I was like, that. I don't know what that is, but I want to be that. And then my second year there, I realized that I was a lesbian. And that was illegal when I was there. And so that dissonance between I want to be a Marine and serve in with those values and in that way, and then being told that I'm not good enough and it is illegal for me to be able to serve that way, was really difficult to deal with. And there was no way that I was going to go home and tell my parents that I was giving up an opportunity of a lifetime because I had this realization about my identity. And so I decided to stay, and then 9/11 happened. And so that wasn't a choice at all. We had been struck by terrorists, and it was my job, our duty, to go and defend our nation and fight for freedom. And so I was commissioned in the Marine Corps, and I did one tour in Iraq. I did my duty, but there was a turning point. So I was out working out, and I went back to my office. I was wearing some basketball shorts, and I walked into my office, and my colonel said, "You know, you might have a boyfriend if your shorts weren't so long." And I just stood there because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do, but I knew if I said something that I would probably get kicked out. So that wasn't an option. And so I just said, "Thank you, sir." And in that moment, I realized that I was on foreign soil fighting for freedom, and I myself was not free. And it was that hypocrisy that kind of made me realize that policies have consequences. And the only way to make sure people didn't have the experience that I had was to make sure that it gets enshrined in proper policy that is informed by someone's experience. And so that was the mindset that I took to Tesla. How can I bake into the system rules, whether I was there or not, bake into the system rules that actually helped people that Elon couldn't strip away? And that's how I look at this, is there are ways to understand somebody's lived experience and the impact that policy and laws have on them. And then it's incumbent upon us to figure out how to write something that actually helps people instead of inadvertently or under the guise of make somebody's life miserable when they're just trying to serve the country.
I want the audience to know that as you read this book, you're going to love to find out how she carved out safe spaces for conversations and honest discourse at Tesla. It's magnificently done, by the way. I thought of a word in my head as I was reading the book, and then I got to a chapter, authenticity. And you speak about authenticity. Please describe a lot of what you talked about in the book to the audience.
Sure. I mean, authenticity is who you are and how you show up, your ability to embody your values. And I think the word gets used a lot, but to really think about what it means to you, we talk about it in terms of vulnerability. How can you be vulnerable with yourself enough to really challenge what you think your values are and how maybe they've evolved or how they've changed and what that looks like. We also talk about it in terms of self-compassion. So there are things that, people just don't know. My mom had no idea what to do when I told her that I was gay. And I didn't know what to do when I realized that I was gay. but I had to give myself that self-compassion to learn and understand what that meant for me and to evolve into what being my authentic self looked like. And so authenticity isn't something that is static, it's something that changes over time as you learn and grow and experience. And so I don't talk about this in the book, but we talk about it in terms of like things that maybe don't serve you, right? So there were things we did in the Marine Corps that were necessary to be authentic and to serve as a Marine officer that I carried to Tesla. And though they were actively, those values that were perfectly aligned with my time in the Marine Corps were no longer working at Tesla. And so you have to be willing to say, wait a minute, this thing that I thought was important or was a part of who I was, maybe that's changed a little bit and shifted. And so we want people to think of authenticity as fluid and something that is going to change over time, but you have to be willing to do that inner game work to really understand what is important to you, what do you believe in, what are your values, and how do you bring this forward.
You also talk about agency and the way that we sometimes describe or think agency, the word means, is wrong. The way that you describe it in the book is exactly what agency should be. Please share with the audience the true power of agency.
Agency is making intentional decisions based on your values. This is the definition that we came up with. And so we named our company the Agency Initiative. And you can probably imagine how many times people call us like the agency or what did your agency do? It's like, well, not that. But it really is understanding that you have power. Whether or not you think you do or whether or not you've been conditioned to believe that you don't, you have some agency and some power and control over the decisions and the choices that you make. And so what we want people to think about is, where do you have it that maybe now, maybe, I can't think of the word, but like maybe you've just been conditioned to think like, oh, learned helplessness, that's what I'm looking for. So there's nothing I can do. Donald Trump is the president, there's nothing we can do about it. That's not true. What we have to do is find the places where we have agency and do something. But it's not good enough to do anything. We have to think about what intentional decision making looks like and do the things that matter. And so that's where the thought comes in. How can we be intentional about how we are pushing back against Donald Trump and his administration? And how are we taking those steps and then learning and growing from it? But it really is, how do we think about being intentional, what is the step, and then pushing to take action? And Mike and I talk about this too. Sometimes inaction is a choice. That is a decision. And so maybe that is appropriate in some cases, but I would bet right now is not a time for inaction. And we should start thinking about what intentional steps we need to take over the next 3 years to make sure we still have a democracy when we have a chance to elect a new president.
Thank you. Inaction sometimes comes from employees that are afraid. And they're afraid sometimes because they have a lack of not just confidence, but maybe even a lack of self-worth in some cases. As a team leader, how did you instill self-worth into people that may have been less than confident? How does that lack of self-worth play into being a silent worker?
Right. I mean, I think a big piece of it is like, you have to human as a leader. And that's what's missing with a lot of leaders. We're talking about coding, we're talking about tech, we're talking about all of these skills and technical skills. But the most important skill you need as a leader is to be able to have empathy and connect with the people around you on your team. And so that is the number one responsibility. And so I had to make time to check in, to be intentional, and to model what that looked like for all of the leaders on my team. And that's also when you think about agency, I had control over that. I could say, we had an incident in the factory, and We were acting like it didn't happen, but I knew everybody was upset by this incident in the factory. We were having a staff meeting. And I said, how are you all doing? And immediately people were like, and it all came out. And that's what we did during that staff meeting. We talked about it and we validated their feelings. And like we said, the work's gonna get done. Like we don't need to spend an hour on that. I need to spend an hour with you to make sure that we are all okay when we walk out of this room back to the work. And I think that's what people miss, is that you have to take the time to be a human and connect with people to be able to get them to understand and get in a good place and feel safe, to then be able to move on into work.
Thank you. At one time, we used to have the courts to protect us. If the courts don't show courage in protecting the rule of law or morality, how can a mid-level cog in a corporate machine harness that courage that's necessary?
That's right. I mean, so we talk about this in terms of calculus. Like everybody has their own way of understanding what they can and what they can't do. But what we need everybody to do is do that calculus right now and recognize what steps can you take as a middle manager, a cog in that wheel, and commit to do something. Because I think it's that learned helplessness of like, oh, it doesn't matter, or it's not gonna make a difference. But if we all live our lives like that, then it isn't gonna be any different, and we're all in deep, you know what. But so we have to make that commitment, no matter what our role is, no matter what our title is, no matter where we are in our lives, to do something, because we are the last line of defense. And unfortunately, we are finding ourselves at the last line of defense. And so now it's on us, y'all. And we've got to make that commitment before it's too late. And we're finding ourselves having to come back from fascism.
Scary.
Yeah, it is.
In the book, you make a spot-on comparison between corporate flexibility, or the lack thereof, and BlackBerry. Everybody remember the BlackBerries? Who had a BlackBerry? Wow. Please share that with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are corporations. I have to shout out to Mike. I know he was like, this was Mike's piece, but there are corporations who think they have it figured out. And they've got the product, and the product is what it is, and they're going to move forward no matter what. But when you think about BlackBerry, things shifted when the iPhone came out. And that changed the entire dynamic of what was happening with tech. But what happened to BlackBerry? They stayed the course because they weren't flexible. Who has a BlackBerry now? Who has an iPhone? Right? And so it's similar for us as well. We can stay the course, but we're going to be BlackBerry. Or we can decide we're going to be Apple, and we're going to listen to the consumer, and we're going to hear what they want and what they need, and then we're going to make some intentional decisions to go and flex and do something different. So maybe take that away. Don't be BlackBerry.
Thank you. Get into my 1931 Model A. Drive away. If the Democrats take control of Congress in 2026, is there specific legislation that you'd like to see them support bringing up to avoid exactly the pitfalls that we're talking about here?
I mean, I think we need term limits. I think we need to get rid of Citizens United. Like, I think there are a lot of ways that the system is rigged so that we can't regain control, or one party is able to stay in control, and the minority party has no power. So I think, how do you understand the mechanics of how the system works, and then let's figure out what we can do to change some of those mechanics. There's so many things that are messed up right now. Like, I don't even know where to start, whether it's immigration, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education. There's going to be a entire mess of a system that's going to need to be reconfigured. But this is what I think is the opportunity here. Maybe the system was flawed, and maybe the system wasn't working, and maybe we needed it to be dismantled, unfortunately, but not in this way. But do we have the opportunity to build it back in a way that might actually work for more people? And so that's what I'm excited about, because I think as scary as this is, as frustrating and as angry as we all are, there's opportunity on the side of this, if and only if we get through to the other side and make a commitment to build something that works for everybody and not just in our own interest. Yep.
Wonderful. To someone who has not read the book, but will after this, but to someone who has not yet read the book, what do you want them to know?
Can I read something?
Please. Please.
My tabs are not working for me right now.
But they're so organized.
Okay. So the last chapter of the book we call The Future We Choose. And okay, so I'm not going to read it all. I'll just kind of read the last piece. And this is about Star Trek. You're welcome. Glasses. Okay. That's why Star Trek has always been more than just a vision of the future. It represents what is possible when we commit to curiosity over fear, to collaboration over control, to purpose over power. It's a future where leaders do not let uncertainty paralyze them, but instead see it as a frontier, one that must be explored with courage. And that's the future we choose. Not because it's easy, not because the path is clear, but because we believe in what is possible. Because we have hope. Hope that through courage, we can build a world where trust replaces fear, where innovation is driven by inclusion, and where leadership is not about control, but about possibility. The call to courage has been made. The future is being written. And someday, we hope you'll look back at this moment on the choices that you've made, and instead of asking, what just happened, you'll know. You'll know that you helped build something better, and you'll know that you chose courage over fear.
The book is Courage Over Fear, Harness the Power of Agency to Lead in Uncertain Times. Along with Mike Randolph, we thank Kristen Kavanaugh so very much for being here today.